Just all these details are really not a good look for Jon Jones. If it all ends up being true, everything that's in the police report, I just really don't know how this is going to unfold for him. You're going to see all these ties back to his history and everything on that front. And I think that's really what's going to account to how he's potentially punished here is, everything he's done in the past.
Jon Jones, once praised as the chosen one, a man many said was blessed by God himself, now stands as a symbol of a legend tearing down his own empire. Inside the cage, he was pure brilliance, a prodigy who took the UFC by storm. At just 23, he snatched the championship belt, crushing giants like Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, and Rashad Evans. Fans called him untouchable, unstoppable, invincible. Big brands like Nike, Gatorade, and Reebok couldn't sign him fast enough. He was the golden boy of mixed martial arts, but behind the fame, a darker tale brewed. Wild parties before fights, late-night chaos, and a Bentley smashed after one too many drinks. Then came the bombshells, testing positive for cocaine right before a title defense, multiple doping violations, and arrests that painted headlines in red. Each scandal didn't just damage his image, it shattered the illusion of the perfect champion. People began asking, is this still Jon Jones, the genius of the cage, or a man spiraling out of control? Jon Jones wasn't born a warrior, he became one. Growing up with three brothers, he was the smallest, the weakest, constantly living in the shadows of his bigger, stronger siblings who would later dominate in the NFL. That struggle lit a fire inside him, a hunger to prove he could be more than just a little brother. He threw himself into wrestling with a vengeance, grinding harder than anyone else, and soon became a high school champion. College couldn't hold him for long. Jon dropped out chasing something far greater, the world of MMA. And in just 4 months of training, he exploded onto the UFC scene like a storm. Fans couldn't believe it. A young fighter moving like a veteran, fighting as if destiny itself had written his script. By 23, he made history, becoming the youngest UFC champion ever. Then came the fame, the flash, the fortune. Nike, Gatorade, and Reebok threw millions his way, crowning him the golden boy of combat sports. Inside the octagon, he dismantled legends. Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, one by one. When a fighter so young is crowned the greatest, victory stops feeling like a thrill. It becomes a habit, a routine. Jon Jones began to believe he couldn't be touched. His ego grew larger than life. The rules became nothing more than speed bumps. And that feeling of invincibility started planting the seeds of his downfall. By 2012, Jon wasn't just winning. He was dominating. The fame, the money, the spotlight, everything sparkled so bright that it blinded him to the darkness creeping in from the edges.
Yeah, sure, he did some bad things, but he fixed himself, and here he is, and he went on to do great things. He went on to beat tough challengers, and the past is in the past, and he turned himself around. But here we are again, where he's not going to be able to prove that for quite some time. And the more of these things that happen, or these alleged things happen, it's going to make it harder and harder for him to recover his legacy. So he had a tough challenge ahead of him before. And now, if these things turn out to be true, he's got even a bigger challenge to try to save his legacy, in my opinion.
Then came the night that changed everything. Around 1 a.m., police found Jon Jones clearly intoxicated, sitting behind the wheel with an open container and a handgun in his car. Reporters said, this comes at a bad time for the UFC light heavyweight champion. It seemed like he was finally getting his career back on track, but all that hope vanished in one crash. In May 2012, Jon's brand new Bentley, a shining symbol of success, swerved out of control and slammed into a telephone, devastating spinning back elbow in the 4th round. It was pure instinct, pure survival, and somehow it saved him. The judges handed him a unanimous decision, and the belt stayed around his waist, but not without controversy. Fans were furious. Many swore Gustafsson had been robbed, saying Jones's win was nothing more than a gift from the judges. The media went wild, calling it the fight of the year, even one of the greatest fights in UFC history. But behind the praise was something far more serious. The debate exploded everywhere. Yes, Jon Jones was still the champion, but was he still untouchable? The war with Gustafsson had left more than bruises. It left a visible crack in his legend. His belt was intact, but his aura wasn't. For the first time, people looked at him differently.
UFC champion Jon Bones Jones. Reinstated in October, preparing to fight Ovince St. Preux at UFC 197 this weekend in Vegas. So,
like the introduction.
It's been a while. Well, we have to tell your story. I'd like to hear it from you. What has the last year been like?
You know, the last year has been, it's been a major learning situation for sure. You know, I've had the opportunity to kind of, you know, be vulnerable in front of the world. You know, step away from sports for a while, you know, work on myself as a person, as a parent. You know, it sounds weird to hear, but, you know, it's been a blessing in disguise. You know, I've really...
Not as a god, but as a man who could actually bleed. Instead of pulling himself back together, Jones spiraled further into chaos. Fame had become his drug, and he was hooked on the belief that his talent alone could save him from everything. 2 years later, the stage was set for another colossal clash. January 3rd, 2015, UFC 182, Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier. This wasn't just a title defense. It was personal. Cormier was his rival, his opposite, a man who refused to bow down to Jones's dominance. The buildup was tense, emotional, almost explosive. And after 5 hard rounds of pure warfare, Jon's hand was raised once again. He had done it. Defended his belt and silenced the ghost of the Gustafsson fight, at least for a moment. Inside the cage, he was still the king. Fierce, calculated, and seemingly unbeatable. It sounded bad, or really bad. But here's the twist. Under UFC regulations, cocaine wasn't banned outside of competition. That loophole meant Jon Jones could still step into the octagon without consequence. So UFC 182 went on like nothing ever happened. No suspensions, no press chaos, drinking, the women, everything. The outrage wasn't just aimed at Jon. It hit the UFC hard too. Fans were furious, asking how the most elite fighting organization in the world could let its star compete after testing positive for cocaine. The betrayal cut deep. The MMA community split right down the middle. Some longtime fans were heartbroken, saying they'd never support him again, calling Jones the wayward son of MMA. Others mocked his win over Cormier. What was once hailed as proof of greatness now looked like a hollow, tainted victory. In just days, the Golden Boy had become a laughingstock. The man once seen as the chosen one was now the face of scandal. Trying to control the chaos, Jon Jones made a public statement. He was checking himself into rehab. For a brief moment, fans thought maybe he was ready to change. But just a few days later, headlines dropped again. He had already left the facility. The internet exploded with skepticism. People started asking, was this real or just a PR move to save his image? And just when everyone thought the drama couldn't get worse, it did. April 26th, 2015, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jon Jones, behind the wheel of his Bentley, crashed into another car, and the victim was a pregnant woman. But what truly enraged the public was what came next. Jones fled the scene, leaving her behind, injured and terrified. When police later searched his car, they discovered a pipe and suspected drug residue inside. This was no longer just another scandal. It had turned into a public war. The MMA world was furious. Fans, fighters, and even the same media outlets that once worshipped Jon Jones now turned their backs on him. The man who had once been the UFC's golden boy, endorsed by giants like Gatorade, Nike, and Reebok, was now being torn apart by the same industry that built him up. People started saying the truth out loud. The image he sold no longer matched the man he really was. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The fallout came fast and brutal. Nike cut him off. Reebok followed right after. Years of sponsorship money gone overnight. And then came the hammer. The UFC made history by stripping Jon Jones of his light heavyweight championship and suspending him indefinitely. The same man who once stood at the top of the sport had fallen straight to rock bottom, and it all happened in a matter of months. For the first time in his career, Jon Jones was completely out. No title, no deals, no glory. He was forced to step away from the octagon, his reputation hanging by a thread. But even in disgrace, the UFC couldn't ignore the truth. No one, absolutely no one, could draw attention like Bones Jones. So when his suspension finally lifted, the company wasted no time. The comeback was set. It had supplements. His tone carried both frustration and desperation. The sound of a man fighting not just for titles, but for identity. But public sympathy was fading fast. Every comeback announcement was met with eye rolls instead of cheers. ChatGPT said the MMA world was split right down the middle. On one side were the loyalists, Fans who believed that greatness could coexist with flaws, arguing that talent like Jon Jones's only appears once in a generation. On the other were the disillusioned, those who saw him as the sport's greatest cautionary tale, a man who had every gift imaginable, yet couldn't stay out of his own way. As the headlines intensified, Jones's return to the octagon at UFC 197 carried an eerie tension. The anticipation wasn't about whether he would win, it was whether he would last. Could he fight without controversy? Could he stay clean long enough to rebuild what he had shattered? In Vegas, cameras flashed, crowds roared, but beneath the spectacle was unease. Every step Jones took toward the cage felt heavier, burdened by suspicion, haunted by repetition. When Bruce Buffer announced his name, the cheers mixed with boos, echoing the divided feelings of an entire sport. To some, it was the beginning of another comeback. To others, just the prelude to another fall. Either way, Jon Jones had once again become the center of a storm, a fighter battling not just opponents, but the weight of his own legacy. A cycle of brilliance followed by self-destruction. To them, Jon Jones's apologies had become rehearsed, his comebacks predictable preludes to another collapse. The tears at the press conference, though genuine to some, felt like deja vu to many others. In the court of public opinion, Jones was no longer the prodigy who could do no wrong. He was the fallen champion, the man who couldn't stay out of his own way. Every denial, every promise of redemption seemed to echo hollowly against the backdrop of his past mistakes. The UFC, desperate to maintain its golden era of superstars, found itself in an awkward position, defending its biggest draw while trying to uphold its commitment to fairness. For the first time, the organization's faith in Jones began to waver. Sponsors hesitated. Reporters questioned whether his name could ever again headline without controversy. Even inside the gym, whispers followed him. Teammates spoke of a man torn between two lives, the disciplined athlete and the reckless soul chasing chaos. ChatGPT said it was a bittersweet farewell, one that carried both respect and sadness. For over a decade, Jon Bones Jones had been the face of modern MMA, a generational talent who redefined what dominance looked like inside the cage, yet outside of it, he became a living cautionary tale, proof that brilliance alone isn't enough to survive fame's relentless storm. As the headlines spread, fans looked back on his career with mixed emotions. The same man who had once seemed invincible had now become a symbol of wasted potential. Commentators reflected on the irony, how the fighter who dismantled legends was ultimately defeated by his own demons. Dana White's words, "No one can replace Jon Jones's legacy," carried weight. Despite all the controversies, no one could deny the magic Jones brought to the octagon, his unpredictable strikes, his composure under fire, his to make elite opponents look ordinary. Even his critics agreed that MMA might never see another fighter quite like him. And perhaps that's what makes his story so uniquely compelling. Not the perfection of his record, but the imperfection of his journey. Every return to the octagon feels like an act of defiance, a statement that no matter how many times he falls, he refuses to be defined by failure. Jones's battles are no longer just against his opponents. They're against time, doubt, and the ghosts of his own past. For fans, every appearance carries a mix of awe and anxiety. Will this be the time he stays clean, focused, and true to his potential? Or will history repeat itself once more? Even amid the controversies, when the cage door closes and the crowd roars, Jon Jones still reminds the world why he's one of the greatest to ever do it. His precision, creativity, and instinct inside the octagon remain unmatched. In a sport built on resilience, Jon Jones stands as its most paradoxical champion, both the architect of his own downfall and the author of his greatest comebacks. His journey reminds us that greatness isn't just about dominance. It's about enduring the storm, facing the consequences, and continuing to rise when the world expects you to break. A fighter who could have easily disappeared under the weight of his own scandals, yet refused to fade away, Jon Jones remains standing in defiance of every doubt ever cast upon him, as if determined to prove that failures outside the cage could never erase the legacy he built within it. Despite relentless criticism, Jones didn't retreat. He returned again and again, stepping into the octagon, not just to face his opponents, but to confront his own past. Every fight became more than a contest for a title. It became a testament to redemption, a struggle to prove that the fire within him still burned as fiercely as ever. Fans may disagree on who Jon Jones is as a man. But almost no one denies his talent. His creative striking, his tactical brilliance, and his ability to adapt under pressure remain unmatched. Fascinating athletes.